The invitation arrived on a Wednesday night, cream-colored, expensive, his handwriting. Her ex-husband was getting married, and he wanted her there to watch. The note inside said 4 words that changed everything. No hard feelings, no hard feelings about the affair, no hard feelings about the divorce, no hard feelings about walking away with $340,000 in savings, the house, the retirement accounts. While she got $1,200 a month, a 10-year-old car, and 2 little boys who asked why daddy didn't live with them anymore. She read that note 3 times, and then she made a decision. She was going to that wedding, but not as the woman he expected to see. Not broken, not small, not sorry. She was going to show him, in front of everyone he had ever wanted to impress, exactly what he threw away. What happened next? He never saw it coming, and neither will you. Stay with me. Lesson statement. This is a story about what happens when a woman stops waiting to be rescued and decides, quietly, one step at a time, to rescue herself. If Rebecca's story stayed with you today, if you have ever sat in a parking lot after a hard meeting, staring at the steering wheel, wondering if you have enough left to keep going, then this story was made for you. You are not alone, and you are stronger than you currently believe. If this video gave you something, a moment of recognition, a breath of courage, anything at all, please hit the like button. It takes 1 second and it tells us this kind of story matters. Leave a comment below and tell us, what is one moment in your own life when you chose to keep going despite everything? We read every single one, every word. Share this with one woman in your life who needs to hear it today. Your sister, your friend, the person in your circle who is quietly rebuilding. Send it to her without explanation. She will understand why. And if you are new here, subscribe and turn on notifications. We share new stories every week. Stories about survival, about second chances, about the ordinary, extraordinary courage of women who decided they were not done yet. We will see you next week. Keep going.
The envelope was sitting on her doorstep when Rebecca Calloway got home at 11:14 on a Wednesday night. She almost stepped on it. She was still wearing her grocery store vest, the green one with the name tag that said Rebecca in cheerful block letters, as though cheerfulness was a job requirement. And her feet hurt in the specific way they hurt after 8 hours of standing on concrete floors. She had 2 bags of marked-down produce tucked under one arm because marked-down produce was still produce, and Cooper had a science project that involved actual vegetables, and Miles had eaten the last banana that morning before school. She picked up the envelope. Cream-colored, heavy stock, the kind of paper that costs more than her electric bill. Her name was written on the front in handwriting she recognized without wanting to. She stood there on the doorstep of her apartment. 2nd floor, Portland, Oregon, heating that worked sometimes, and neighbors who played bass-heavy music on weeknights. And she held that envelope for a long moment before she went inside. The boys were at her sister Diane's for the night. The apartment was quiet. She set the bags down, took off her vest, made coffee she probably should not have made at 11 p.m. Then she sat at the kitchen table, the one with the leg that wobbled if you put too much weight on the right side, and opened the envelope. The invitation was exactly what she expected. Heavy cardstock, gold lettering, Garrett Michael Calloway and Tessa Ann Wyndham request the honor of your presence at their wedding ceremony and reception. She read the date twice. September 14th. She read it a 3rd time because her brain refused to process it on the first 2 attempts. September 14th was the anniversary of her mother's death. Her mother, Carol Mercer, who had passed 11 years ago after a long illness. Her mother, whose grave Garrett had taken her to on a rainy October evening 14 years ago, where he had knelt in the wet grass and asked her to marry him, saying he wanted her to feel her mother's presence on the happiest moment of her life. She had thought that was the most romantic thing she had ever heard. She thought about that now, sitting at her wobbly kitchen table at 11:23 p.m. in her grocery store uniform with marked-down produce on her counter. There was a handwritten note tucked inside the invitation, his handwriting. The same handwriting that used to leave her notes on the bathroom mirror. The same handwriting that signed the divorce papers 4 years ago. Becca, no hard feelings. The boys should see what a healthy relationship looks like. Both of us moving forward. Best. Gee, she read that 3 times too. No hard feelings. She thought about the $340,000 in joint savings that was no longer joint. She thought about the house in Lake Oswego, with the backyard where she had planted a vegetable garden, and the boys had learned to ride bikes. She thought about the 2015 Honda Civic with 140,000 miles on it. That was her share of 2 cars, one of which was a nearly new SUV. She thought about the $1,200 a month in child support, and the 2 jobs, and the marked down produce, and the heating that worked sometimes. No hard feelings. She set the invitation down, picked up her coffee, looked at the wall. Then she did something she had not done in a very long time. She laughed. Not a happy laugh, not a relieved laugh. The specific laugh of a woman who has just realized that the situation she is in is so completely absurd that crying would not adequately cover it. She was still laughing quietly when her phone buzzed. A text from her sister Diane. Boys are asleep. Cooper asked for 3 glasses of water in a row. I think he's plotting something. You okay? Rebecca looked at the invitation, at the note, at the date. She typed back, "Can you come over tomorrow morning? Bring coffee. I need to show you something." Diane responded in under 10 seconds. Should I bring the good coffee or the emergency coffee? Rebecca considered this. Both, she typed. Then she turned off the kitchen light, left the invitation on the table, and went to stand in the doorway of the boys' room, which they did not currently occupy, but which still smelled like them, like the coconut shampoo Miles used and the particular brand of sneaker that Cooper refused to throw away despite the left sole peeling off. She had put glow-in-the-dark stars on their ceiling 8 months ago, stayed up until 1 in the morning, arranging them into actual constellations because she had promised them a galaxy room, and she kept her promises. Orion was slightly crooked. She had never fixed it. She stood there in the doorway for a while, looking at the crooked Orion, thinking about September 14th and no hard feelings, and the specific kind of man who chooses his ex-wife's grief as a backdrop for his happiness. Then she went to bed. She did not sleep particularly well, but here's what I want you to understand before we go any further. I was not broken. I know it might sound like I was. The 2 jobs, the marked down produce, the heating that worked sometimes. I know the picture looks a certain way from the outside, but broken is when you stop. And I had not stopped. Not once in 4 years. That is not strength. That is just what mothers do. We do not stop. We cannot afford to. The stopping would have been easier in some ways. The not stopping is the whole story. Diane arrived the next morning at 8:45 with 2 coffees and a paper bag of pastries and her hair in a bun that suggested she had been awake for exactly long enough to leave the house, but not long enough to care about her hair. She took one look at the invitation on the kitchen table and sat down without being asked. She read it once, read the note, looked at the date, read the note again. Then she looked up at Rebecca. "He used your mother's death anniversary," she said. It was not a question. Rebecca nodded. Diane set the note down very carefully, the way you set something down when what you actually want to do is throw it across the room. "Okay," Diane said. "I need the good coffee for this." They sat at the wobbly table, and Rebecca told her everything. The envelope, the note, the date, the specific quality of the laugh that had come out of her at 11:23 p.m., standing alone in her kitchen in her grocery store vest. Diane listened without interrupting, which was not Diane's natural state, which told Rebecca how seriously she was taking this. When Rebecca finished, Diane was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He wants you to come and be small. You understand that, right? He wants Tessa and her whole family to see you and think, 'Look what he upgraded from.'" "I know," Rebecca said. "So you're not going." Rebecca wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "I didn't say that." Diane looked at her. Rebecca looked back. Diane said, "Rebecca Ann Mercer Calloway." Rebecca said, "I know." Diane said, "You have a plan." Rebecca said, "I have the beginning of a plan." She told Diane about Julian. She had not told anyone about Julian. Not Diane, not her closest friends, not the school counselor who had gently asked once if Rebecca had any support system in her life. 14 months of careful, deliberate silence. Because she had known from almost the beginning that if Garrett found out she was seeing someone, especially someone like Julian, he would weaponize it. This is what Diane knew. Rebecca's sister, 38 years old, grocery store cashier, data entry contractor, single mother, had been quietly, secretly dating a billionaire for over a year. Diane stared at her for 5 full seconds. "You," Diane said slowly, "have been dating a billionaire." Quietly, Rebecca said, "and secretly, for 14 months. For 14 months. And you did not tell me. I couldn't tell anyone." Diane picked up her pastry, put it down, picked it up again. "Does he have a private plane?" she asked. "He does," Rebecca said. Diane looked at the ceiling, looked back at Rebecca. "Your ex-husband invited you to his wedding to make you feel poor and forgotten," Diane said. "And you have a billionaire with a private plane who wants to be with you." "That is the situation, yes," Rebecca said. Diane was quiet for another moment. Then she said, "This is the best morning I have had in years. Tell me everything." So Rebecca told her about Julian Hartwell, about the coffee shop 14 months ago, the spilled coffee, the laughter, the 2-hour conversation that made her almost late picking up the boys, about the 5 weeks of coffee before dinner, about falling for someone and immediately panicking, about why she had kept it secret. After the divorce, she said, "I learned something the hard way. In family court, the person who controls the paperwork controls the outcome. Garrett's attorney was his college roommate. Mine was fresh out of law school, the only one I could afford. Garrett had 3 months to prepare financially before he told me he wanted a divorce. I had a weekend. That is not a fair fight. And I knew that if Garrett found out I was with someone wealthy, he would be back in court within a week trying to reduce child support, claiming I didn't need it anymore. Dating doesn't change support obligations legally," Diane said. "Not automatically, no, but it creates a fight, more hearings, more attorney fees. And every dollar I spend on attorneys is a dollar that isn't going toward the boys." Diane nodded slowly. "So, you protected yourself. I protected my kids," Rebecca said. "There is a difference." She paused. Julian understood. He said, "Your timeline? Your rules. He has been waiting for 14 months without a single complaint." Diane looked at her steadily. "And now?" Rebecca looked at the invitation. "Now Garrett has sent me a handwritten note on a $100 piece of card stock, telling me there are no hard feelings. On the anniversary of my mother's death, and I'm tired of being careful." There was a silence. Then Diane said, "So what is the plan?" Rebecca said, "I go to that wedding. I go in the dress and the shoes and on the plane. I walk into that room with Julian and the boys, and I let him see exactly what he chose to leave behind. And while I'm doing that," she paused, "Julian has been building something, a financial case. He found discrepancies in our divorce settlement. He has a forensic accountant. He has documents." Diane went very still. What kind of documents? The kind, Rebecca said carefully, that explain where $280,000 went before Garrett filed for divorce. The kitchen was very quiet. Diane said, "He hid assets." Rebecca said, "He did more than that, but I am still learning the full shape of it." She looked at her sister. "I spent years making myself small so he could feel big. I kept his schedule and raised his children and believed every word he said about who I was and what I was worth. And when he was done with me, he spent months, Diane, moving money and structuring accounts so that when the divorce came, I would walk away with almost nothing." Her voice was steady. That was the thing about 4 years of practice. You learn to be steady. "I am done being small," she said. Diane looked at her for a long moment. Then she stood up, walked around the table, and hugged her sister hard. "It is about time," she said. "I know," Rebecca said. They held on for a while. Outside, Portland was doing what Portland did in September, offering a tentative, apologetic kind of sunshine, the kind that knew it had been gone for a while and was doing its best. Rebecca had a plan, not a complete plan, not a perfect plan, the beginning of one. But that was how everything started, not with certainty, with a direction and the willingness to take the first step. That, I have learned, is always enough to begin. She met Julian that evening. She had been pulling away from him for 3 weeks. The careful, incremental withdrawal she did when she got scared, when she felt something real enough to lose. He had noticed. He had said nothing, waited, sent a single text every few days that said only, "I'm here, no pressure." She texted him, "Can I come over? I have something to tell you." He responded in 4 seconds. "I'll make dinner." His apartment was in the Pearl District on the 14th floor with windows that looked out over the city in a way that Rebecca's second-floor apartment emphatically did not. She had been there a handful of times. It still felt like walking into someone else's life. Julian Hartwell was 42 years old. He had founded a software company in his late 20s that had, 11 years later, sold for $2.3 billion. He had dark hair, going slightly silver at the temples, which he was unbothered by, and the kind of eyes that paid attention. Real attention. The active kind. He was also, she had discovered 6 months into knowing him, genuinely bad at cooking. Not charmingly bad, actually bad. The kind of bad where the smoke detector had its own complicated feelings about his presence in the kitchen. He was making pasta when she arrived. She watched him stir something with the focused intensity of a man who knew he was on thin ice and was compensating with effort. She said, "How long has that been boiling?" He said, without turning around, "I prefer not to answer that question." She moved him gently out of the way, turned down the heat, and started over. They worked around each other in his kitchen with the ease of people who had been doing this for a while, and when they sat down with something that was actually edible, she told him about the invitation. He was quiet through the whole thing. He did not interrupt, which was one of the things she had noticed about him early. The specific quality of his attention. He listened the way people listened when they were actually listening, not waiting for their turn to speak. When she finished, he set down his fork. He said, "I need to tell you something, and I need to tell you that I handled it wrong." She looked at him. "Over the past 8 months," he said, "I have been having Garrett's finances looked at. Professionally. I hired a forensic accountant named Stephen Grove. I did it without telling you because I knew you would tell me not to, and I know that was wrong, making a unilateral decision about your life without asking you. I know exactly how that sounds, and I am not asking you to be okay with it right away." Rebecca looked at him for a long moment. "That is what Garrett used to do," she said. Decide what was best for me without asking, Julian nodded. I know. I thought about that after. I am sorry. That is a fair comparison, and I do not want to earn it. Why did you do it? Because I looked at your settlement terms 8 months ago, and the numbers did not add up. And because I have enough resources to find out why, and you did not. And because He stopped. Started again. Because watching someone be systematically cheated and having the ability to do something about it and choosing not to felt unconscionable to me. But I should have asked. You were the one it happened to. It was your decision to make. There was a silence. What did Stephen find? She asked. Julian got up, came back with a folder. She opened it. 3 shell LLCs, he said. Opened 18 months before Garrett filed for divorce. Rebecca, $280,000 moved through those companies in the year and a half before your settlement. Money that should have been marital assets. She turned pages. There is also a property, he continued, a vacation cabin in Asheville, North Carolina, registered in his mother Patricia's name, purchased with a joint credit line 8 months before the divorce. It never appeared in the settlement disclosure. She turned another page. And here? He reached over and opened to a specific document. These are Garrett's income declarations for the settlement. He listed his annual salary at $180,000. Stephen's analysis suggests his actual compensation, including deferred income and company distributions, was closer to $410,000. Rebecca set the folder down. She looked at the city through Julian's floor-to-ceiling windows. Portland, 14 floors below, doing its September thing. He lied, she said. During the settlement proceedings. Under oath, yes. How much should I have received? Julian was careful. That is a question for your attorney. But the short answer is, significantly more. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Tell me the rest. He told her about Marcus Reed, Garrett's business partner of 11 years. Marcus had his own documentation, printed, signed, dated, covering a broader pattern of financial manipulation than even Stephen's analysis had found. Marcus felt guilty, had, for years, was ready to talk. And there was one more thing, the thing that had kept Julian up at three separate nights in the past month, trying to decide how to tell her. There is a letter, he said, from Garrett to his own attorney, dated 22 months before he filed for divorce, before he claims to have met Tessa. He slid a single page across the table. Rebecca read it. She read it twice. The letter outlined, in precise legal language, a strategy for minimizing a spouse's divorce settlement. It referenced LLC formation, asset transfer timelines, income structuring. It was practical and methodical, and it had been written 2 years before Garrett sat across from her on a Tuesday evening and told her he had met someone. The falling in love with Tessa's story, Julian said quietly, was the cover. The financial preparation came first. Rebecca set the page down. She did not cry. She noticed that. 4 years ago, she would have cried. Tonight she felt something different. A cold, clarifying anger, the kind that does not make you fall apart, the kind that makes you precise. She said, He spent 2 years planning to leave me with nothing. Yes, Julian said. And then he sent me a handwritten note on his wedding invitation that said, No hard feelings. Julian said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. Rebecca closed the folder, slid it back across the table. She said, I need an attorney, a good one. I know one, Julian said. Her name is Jennifer Cross. She is not cheap. Don't, Rebecca said. Don't what? Don't offer to pay for her, he nodded. She will do a consultation for free. After that, you decide. Rebecca looked at him. This is my fight, she said. I know, you can be in it, but it has to be mine to fight. He held her gaze. I understand, he said. I am here. However you need me, however you don't need me, I am here either way. She looked at this man, this patient, attentive, genuinely bad at cooking man who had spent 8 months quietly building her a path out and only wanted her permission to hand her the door. She had spent a long time being afraid of what she would find if she trusted someone again. Looking at him across the table, she thought, maybe the thing I was afraid of was not being hurt. Maybe I was afraid of being seen, of someone seeing the whole mess of what I am, the 2 jobs, and the wobbling table, and the guilt about the boys, and the fear I carry around like a second purse, and deciding to stay anyway. Julian had already seen all of it. He was still here. She said, okay. He said, okay? I am going to that wedding, she said, and I am bringing you, and the boys, and Diane. He looked at her steadily. Are you sure? She picked up her fork. Not even slightly, she said. Ask me again in 6 weeks. He smiled. That was a real smile. The kind that reached his eyes and stayed. They finished dinner. She went home. On the drive back, she thought about the letter dated 22 months before the divorce. She thought about the years she had spent wondering what she had done wrong, what she had not been, what she had failed to be. She thought about a man sitting at a desk 2 years before he left, drafting a legal strategy. While she was in the next room, making dinner and helping with homework, and thinking everything was fine, she did not drive into anything. She parked in her spot, went upstairs, stood in the doorway of the boys' empty room, looked at the crooked Orion on the ceiling, then she opened her laptop and started looking up Jennifer Cross. 3 weeks later, Rebecca was sitting in a small plastic chair in the principal's office at Lincoln Elementary School. The chair was the kind designed for 9-year-olds. It was not comfortable for adults. She suspected this was not an accident. Across from her sat Principal Morrison, who looked like he would rather be anywhere else, and a school counselor named Ms. Paulson, who had a box of tissues on the table in front of her. Rebecca noticed the tissues. She did not reach for them. The situation, Principal Morrison said carefully, is that we received a call from Mr. Calloway expressing concern about instability in the boys' home environment. He indicated that he asked you to monitor them, Rebecca said. Morrison paused. He asked us to be attentive to signs of emotional distress. Yes, Rebecca looked at him. She had been awake since 4 that morning. She had an 8 a.m. data entry shift, a 12 p.m. checkout shift at the grocery store, and a 2 p.m. phone consultation with Jennifer Cross. She had eaten half a granola bar in the car. She said, Mr. Morrison, my sons have perfect attendance. Cooper's reading level is 2 grades ahead. Miles won the math competition last month. Their teachers have described them as settled, engaged, and kind. In what measurable way are they displaying emotional distress? Morrison looked uncomfortable. There are no measurable. Then I would like to understand, Rebecca said, what precisely my ex-husband said that caused this meeting to happen. Morrison and the counselor exchanged a glance. He expressed concern, Morrison said, that a new adult male had been introduced into the household without adequate preparation. Rebecca kept her face very still. She was an expert at keeping her face still. She had developed this skill over years of practice. She said, I see. Thank you for letting me know. I'll be in touch with my attorney about this conversation. She stood, shook both their hands with perfect politeness, and walked to the parking lot. She sat in the 2015 Civic. She did not start the car. She sat there for 22 minutes. This is what I want you to understand about that moment. It was not the worst thing that had happened to me in 4 years. It was not even close to the worst thing. But it was the thing that broke a particular wall I had been maintaining. The one that said I could handle this, that I was managing, that if I was careful enough and quiet enough and strategic enough, Garrett's reach had limits. He had reached into my son's school. He had sat across from a principal and, without one shred of evidence, suggested that I was creating instability, and that principal had called a meeting, with tissues on the table. He was not trying to win the children. I understood that in the parking lot, sitting in my car not starting it. He was trying to win against me. He had always been trying to win against me. The children were the territory, not the point. Knowing that did not make it less frightening, but it did make it clearer. She started the car. She called Jennifer Cross. Jennifer Cross was 44 years old and had been a family law attorney for 16 years and spoke with the specific efficiency of someone who billed by the hour and believed your time was also valuable. She reviewed everything Rebecca told her in 12 minutes. Then she said, "Here is what you need to do right now. Document everything. The school meeting, the date, what was said, who was present. Write it down tonight while it is fresh. This is a pattern of behavior, and patterns require evidence." Second, "Do you have the financial documents we discussed?" "I am getting them," Rebecca said. "Get them faster." Third, Marcus Reed. You need him on record. A sworn affidavit is better than a folder at a meeting. Rebecca drove toward home. She was halfway there when her phone rang. Her landlord. She answered. "Miss Calloway," he said, "I am sorry to be calling with this news. The building has been acquired by a development company. All current tenants will receive formal notice in the next few days, but I wanted to call personally. Vacancy will be required in 60 days. She pulled over. She sat on the side of the road. She said, 60 days. Yes, I am truly sorry. She thanked him. She did not know why she thanked him. Politeness was apparently a reflex that functioned even during active catastrophe. She sat on the side of the road for 4 minutes. Then she called Diane. My landlord just sold the building, she said. There was a pause. Diane said, To who? Developers. When do you have to be out? 60 days. There was a longer pause. Okay, Diane said. I need to pick up the boys at 3, Rebecca said. I'll get them. You come here. I'm fine. Rebecca, Diane said, you are not fine right now, and that is completely allowed. Come here. She came. She sat at Diane's kitchen table, a much sturdier table, she noted, with the distant part of her brain that noticed things. And she told Diane about the school and the landlord and the fact that 60 days from now she would need to have found, secured, and moved into a new apartment while also maintaining 2 jobs and preparing for a court case, and, incidentally, planning to attend her ex-husband's wedding. Diane listened. Then she said, What do you need? Rebecca thought about it. I need to make a list, she said. Diane put paper and a pen on the table. Rebecca made a list. It was not a pretty list. It was a list with a lot of problems and not many immediate solutions, and looking at it was like looking at a map that mostly showed ocean, but it existed. It was concrete. It had boxes she could check. That matters more than it sounds. When the boys came home, she was sitting at the table with her list and a cup of tea, and Cooper walked in and immediately said, Mom, why is Aunt Diane looking at you like that? Like what? Rebecca said. Like when she looks at the news, Miles said helpfully. Like something bad happened, Cooper clarified. Rebecca looked at her sons, 9 years old, Cooper with his father's dark hair and her own stubborn mouth. Miles with her coloring and his own private way of watching the world. Nothing bad happened, she said. Some things changed. We'll figure it out together. Cooper dropped his backpack, came and sat next to her. Can we see the list? He asked. She slid it across the table. Both boys studied it with the gravity of small people who understood more than adults gave them credit for. Miles pointed to one item. What does forensic accountant mean? It means someone who is very good at finding money that other people have hidden, Rebecca said. Miles nodded slowly. Like a detective, but for money. Exactly like that. Cool, said Cooper. Rebecca looked at her sons looking at her list. Later, she would think that was the moment. Not the grand gesture at the wedding, not the arrival on the plane. That ordinary evening at Diane's table. Her boys leaning over a list of problems, calling a forensic accountant cool. That was when I knew we were going to be okay. Not because the list was solved, because we were sitting around it together. On Wednesday, Garrett's attorney filed for emergency custody modification. Rebecca was at work, the grocery store, register 6, when her phone buzzed with Jennifer's name. She stepped to the break room. Jennifer read her the motion. Material change in circumstances. Rebecca's relationship with Julian Hartwell. Concern about financial dependency, instability of the housing situation, introduction of an unknown adult male. Request 1. Reduce child support from $1,200 to $400 per month. Request 2. Modify primary custody to Garrett. Request 3. Restriction preventing Julian from being present during Garrett's parenting time. Rebecca stood in the break room next to the coffee machine that always burned slightly, and she listened to all of it. She said, "Can he win?" Jennifer said, "Not all of it, probably not most of it. But Rebecca, the custody piece is something we have to take seriously, not because he has a strong case, because he has money for attorneys, and we have to respond to everything he files, and every response costs money and time. How much time? Months. And there's something else." Rebecca waited. "His attorney filed a supplement this morning," Jennifer said. "He's claiming you were in an emotional affair during the marriage, that it contributed to its breakdown. That's a lie." "I know. But he is claiming it, and he is asking for it to be considered in the custody modification. Where is he getting this?" Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "There was a blind item in a local gossip blog this morning," she said, "suggesting your relationship with Julian Hartwell began while you were still married." Rebecca was absolutely still. "Someone planted it," Jennifer said. "Yes," Rebecca said. "Yes, they did. I need you to come in tomorrow. I'll be there at 9. She went back to register 6. She scanned groceries for 4 more hours. She was very calm. That particular, cold, clarifying calm that she had been developing for 4 years. That evening, Julian's assistant traced the source of the gossip blog tip. It came from an email account connected to Tessa Wyndham. Julian told her over the phone. He was careful about it, laid the information out without editorializing. Rebecca sat with it for a moment. "She is scared," she said finally. "Tessa? She found out Garrett was hiding money, or she suspects something, or someone in their circle said something about our case, and she is trying to protect the wedding." Rebecca paused. "She does not know me. She has never met me, and she tried to destroy my custody case 3 weeks before her own wedding." Julian said nothing. "That tells me everything I need to know about who is actually driving things over there," Rebecca said. On Thursday morning, Rebecca's position at the grocery store was eliminated. The manager was apologetic. The store was restructuring. Her section was being converted to self-checkout. 3 weeks severance. She drove home. She walked in. The apartment was quiet. The boys were at school. She sat at the kitchen table, the wobbly one. She put her forehead down on the table surface. She stayed that way for a while. "This is what I want to tell you, and I want you to really hear it. There will be moments in your life when everything hits at the same time. Not one thing, not 2 things. The eviction and the job and the custody motion all arriving in the same 72-hour window. Life does not always pace itself considerately. When that happens, the instinct is to freeze, to wait for it to stop, to hope that if you are very still, the next thing will decide not to come. But it keeps coming. The people who get through it are not the ones who never break. They are the ones who break on Thursday and make a spreadsheet on Friday. She lifted her head. She opened her laptop. She made a spreadsheet. Expenses, timeline, available resources, options she had not considered yet. The numbers were not good. They were honest, which is different. On Friday, Garrett's attorney filed again. Emergency motion to expedite the custody hearing, citing Rebecca's housing instability as evidence of inability to provide a stable environment. He had found out about the eviction within 48 hours. Jennifer called. Her voice was steady, which Rebecca appreciated. "He's watching you," Jennifer said. "Or someone close to you is talking. We need to be careful about who knows what and when. Is there a mole? I don't know. But assume everything sensitive can get back to him." Rebecca thought about who knew what. She thought about Patricia. Garrett's mother, Patricia Calloway, 67 years old, who had spent the better part of a decade making subtle and not so subtle remarks about Rebecca's weight and ambition and housekeeping, who had once told her at a Christmas dinner that Garrett needed a partner who could keep up with him. Patricia had called 2 weeks ago. Rebecca had not told Julian or Diane yet, had been processing it alone. Patricia had said, "I owe you an apology, several years' worth." She had said, "I am tired of protecting my son from the consequences of his choices." And she had said, "There is a letter from Garrett to his attorney, dated 22 months before he filed for divorce." Patricia had known about the letter, which meant Patricia had known, for years, that the divorce had been calculated, and Patricia had given it to Julian, which meant that if Garrett was watching Rebecca's circle, he was watching his own mother. Rebecca called Jennifer. She said, "I think the source might be Patricia Calloway." Jennifer was quiet for a beat. "Garrett's mother? His mother has been helping me. If he has surveillance on his own family, then yes." "Okay," Jennifer said. "We operate as if all communications are monitored. Nothing sensitive by phone or text. In-person or encrypted email only. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Good. And Rebecca? What? Get some sleep. You need to be sharp for what's coming." Rebecca looked at her spreadsheet. She saved it. She made a second copy. She slept for 6 hours, which was better than she expected. She met Marcus Reed at a diner in Southeast Portland on a Tuesday. He was already there when she arrived. Mid-40s, kind eyes, a nervousness that expressed itself in the way he arranged and rearranged the sugar packets. She had known Marcus peripherally through the marriage. He had always seemed like the quieter half of the Garrett-Marcus business partnership, the one who nodded at things he was not sure about and went along and probably, in retrospect, should not have. She sat across from him. He said, "Thank you for coming." She said, "Thank you for calling." He looked at his coffee, then at her. "I should have spoken up during the divorce," he said. "I had documentation even then, but I was..." He stopped. "I was afraid. Garrett knew people. Not dangerous people, just connected people. People who could make things professionally uncomfortable. I had a family, a mortgage. I told myself it wasn't my business." He looked ashamed in the way people looked when they had been carrying something for a long time. Rebecca looked at him across the laminate table. She thought about what to say. She thought about the years she had spent being afraid herself, about every conversation she had edited, and every decision she had made carefully, and every moment she had spent calculating what it would cost her to speak. She said, "Marcus, my 9-year-old son got into a fight at school last month defending me because Garrett told his colleagues I was a gold digger. I am currently living in my sister's spare room because my apartment building was sold. I have a custody motion filed against me, claiming I am an unstable influence on my own children. I work the night shift doing data entry after my day job. If you are waiting for someone with less to lose than me to ask you to do the right thing, you are going to be waiting for quite some time. Marcus stared at her. Then he pushed the folder across the table. She opened it. 37 pages. Printed, signed, dated. Bank statements with Garrett's name, LLC paperwork, email chains discussing asset timing, a spreadsheet that someone, Marcus apparently, had been maintaining for 3 years. This is everything, she said. Everything I have, he said. Julian's accountant has more. But this covers the pattern, not just the divorce. The years before. This is who Garrett Calloway is as a businessman. And as a person. She closed the folder. She said, "Will you testify?" He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "That is why I called you. What changed?" He looked out the diner window. He is about to let Tessa's father invest $1.2 million in a company that is functionally insolvent, he said, and he has not told him. And I cannot watch him do to someone else's family what he did to yours. Rebecca nodded. She said, "At the wedding reception, Tessa's father, Richard Wyndham. If you can approach him privately, show him what you have." "I know," Marcus said. "I will be there." She stood to leave. He stood too. They shook hands like two people who had just agreed to something significant. As they walked out, Marcus said quietly, "For what it is worth, I always thought Garrett was kind of an idiot." Rebecca looked at him. "For what it is worth," she said, "so did I. I just needed 14 years to say it out loud." He almost smiled. She walked to her car. She sat for a moment and thought about the folder on the seat beside her, about Marcus arranging sugar packets in a diner, because he had finally decided to do the hard thing. People were complicated. Patricia, Marcus, even Tessa in her way. Most people, in most situations, were not simply good or bad. They were afraid and then finally not afraid, or they made choices they regretted and then had to decide what to do with the regret. That did not make the harm less real. It did not mean the years were given back, but it meant that what came next did not have to be war. It just had to be true. She started the car and drove to her sister's house, where her sons were doing homework, and a spare room was waiting, and there was still a wobbling table she had grown unreasonably fond of. 6 weeks later, the court had ruled. The expedited custody hearing had taken place on a Thursday morning in a courtroom with beige walls and fluorescent lighting that was unflattering to everyone. Jennifer Cross had been, as promised, a pit bull in heels. Garrett's attorney had been polished and prepared and had laid out his case with the confidence of someone who expected to win. The judge reviewed everything. The custody modification was denied. The attempt to use Rebecca's housing situation against her, a housing situation caused entirely by a building sale that had nothing to do with Rebecca's conduct or capacity, did not meet the legal threshold for demonstrating instability. The record showed consistent school attendance, strong academic performance, cooperative, co-parenting documentation. The judge said, on the record, the court finds no evidence of instability attributable to the mother's conduct. Rebecca walked out of the courthouse and allowed herself exactly 1 block before she stopped walking, stood on the sidewalk in downtown Portland, and cried for approximately 90 seconds. Then she wiped her face, texted Diane 3 words, "We won today," and kept walking. Diane responded, "Tonight we celebrate." Rebecca, "Tomorrow. Tonight I have to pack," because she was moving. Diane had the spare room, which meant the boys had Diane's guest room with a pull-out sofa that Cooper had declared architecturally interesting, and Rebecca had a room barely large enough for a bed and the folder of legal documents she kept under it. It was fine. She was building. The celebration lasted 48 hours, which was almost exactly as long as it took for Jennifer to call with the next thing. Good news and bad news, Jennifer said. Rebecca was sitting on Diane's back porch with a cup of coffee. Good news first, she said. The forensic accounting has been formally submitted. Our motion to reopen the settlement is well documented. Garrett's attorneys are going to fight it, but the evidence is strong. And the bad news? Garrett filed something this afternoon, a non-disparagement violation claim. He's arguing you shared financial documents about him with third parties in breach of your original divorce decree. If he can make it stick, there are penalty clauses. Rebecca closed her eyes. What does he know? He knows about Marcus, possibly about Patricia, Rebecca said. Someone told him, Jennifer said yes. Rebecca thought about Garrett's network, his college roommate attorney, his business connections, the way information moved through certain circles in Portland like water through a sieve. She said, can he win the claim? If he can prove you shared documents in bad faith, there could be penalties. But Rebecca, here's the thing. The documents in question prove he committed financial fraud. A judge is going to weigh the non-disparagement claim against the underlying misconduct. This is not his strongest move. Then why did he make it? Jennifer paused. Because he is scared, she said. People who have something to lose file everything when they get scared. He knows we have the letter. He knows we have Stephen's accounting. He is throwing things at the wall. Rebecca let out a slow breath. How long until the wedding? 8 days. Then we let him throw things. Oh, so it's for things, she said. We do not respond to the noise. We focus on what matters. Jennifer said, I want to be clear about something. At the reception, when Marcus approaches Richard Wyndham, that needs to be Marcus's choice and Marcus's action. Nothing traceable back to you. Understood. You are going to that wedding as a guest with perfect manners and an excellent dress. Rebecca looked at the sky over Diane's backyard. I have the dress, she said. I know. Julian's assistant called to confirm the plane. Rebecca made a note to have a separate conversation with Julian about the boundaries of assistant-level coordination. That evening, she sat with Cooper and Miles in Diane's living room and told them about the wedding. Cooper said immediately, Are we going? You want to go to your father's wedding? Cooper shrugged in the way 9-year-olds shrugged, which conveyed both indifference and significant opinion simultaneously. I don't really care about the wedding part, but you said there'd be a plane. Miles looked up from his book. A private plane? Potentially, Rebecca said. Miles looked at Cooper. Cooper looked at Miles. We're going, they said together. She should have led with the plane from the beginning. That night, 3 a.m, Diane's bathroom floor, cold tile. Rebecca sat with her back against the tub and could not breathe. She recognized the panic attack. She had had enough of them to recognize the shape, the chest tightening, the thoughts that arrived too fast to sort. What if this was a mistake? What if showing up broke something beyond repair? What if the boys got caught in the fallout? What if Garrett found a way to use the wedding itself against her? What if she walked into that room and felt small again after all? What if she had been wrong about Julian, and wrong about the plan, and wrong about herself? What if she was not, in fact, enough? She pressed her forehead to her knees. Her phone was on the edge of the tub. Julian texted at 2:17. Can't sleep either. You don't have to talk. Just wanted you to know I'm awake too. She looked at the screen for a long time. Then she typed, I know you're not going anywhere. I'm starting to actually believe it. His response? Best text I've ever received. Terrible timing. She almost laughed. Almost. He called a minute later. She answered. He said, Talk to me. She said, What if I'm not ready? He said, I think you've been ready for years. I think ready isn't the right word. I think the right word is willing. She thought about that. She said, what if it goes wrong? He said, then it goes wrong, and you survive it like you've survived everything else. You are the most competent person I have ever known, Rebecca. Not the richest, or the most powerful, or the most connected. The most competent. You know what to do, and you do it even when it is hard, and you do not quit. That is everything. That is actually everything. She was quiet. He said, are you on the floor? She said, bathroom floor, yes. He said, okay, that's fine. Stay there until you're ready to move. I'll stay on the phone. She said, that's not necessary. He said, I know. He stayed on the phone. She sat on the tile until the tightness in her chest eased, until her breathing found its own rhythm again, until the panic receded to the place it lived and left the rest of her alone. Eventually she said, okay. He said, okay. She said, I'm going to sleep. He said, good. She said, Julian? He said, yeah. She said, thank you for not going anywhere. He was quiet for a moment. He said, thank you for starting to believe it. She went to sleep. She dreamed of an open road, very long, very straight, the kind that stretched to a horizon that kept moving forward every time you reached it. She did not mind that in the dream. The moving horizon seemed, for once, like a good thing. Saturday morning, Diane arrived at 7 with coffee, pastries, and a bag that contained what she called the full deployment kit, which included 3 different kinds of hairspray and opinions about all of them. They spent 2 hours, hair, makeup, nails, a deep, specific red that Rebecca had picked herself. Not because it was Garrett's favorite color, because it was hers. The dress was emerald green. She had bought it 3 weeks ago at a store she could not normally afford, because Diane had taken her and stood outside the dressing room, and when Rebecca walked out in the emerald dress, Diane had made a sound that was not quite a word, but communicated everything necessary. Rebecca stood in front of Diane's full-length mirror. She looked at the woman looking back at her. She recognized her. That was the thing. After 4 years of looking in the mirror and seeing someone she did not quite know, someone diminished, someone edited, someone who had been slowly made smaller by 1,000 small corrections, she recognized the person looking back at her. There you are, she thought. Cooper appeared in the doorway in his small suit, hair carefully combed in a way that suggested adult intervention. He looked at his mother. He said, Mom, you look like someone important. Miles appeared behind him. Miles said, She is someone important, Cooper. Rebecca pressed her lips together very firmly. She said, Thank you, babies. Now go get your shoes. Julian arrived at noon. He was wearing a suit, navy, simple, well-fitted, and he had brought small gifts for the boys. A robotics kit for Cooper, a book on mathematical patterns for Miles, both chosen with the specific attention of someone who had been paying attention. Cooper looked at the robotics kit for approximately 4 seconds. He said, Okay, you can come to stuff now. Julian looked at Rebecca. She spread her hands as if to say, This is your life now. They drove to the private terminal at Portland International. The boys had never been to a private terminal. Cooper immediately identified it as structurally different from the main terminal and began asking the pilot questions about load capacity. The pilot, a patient man named Warren, answered all of them. Miles stood next to Rebecca on the tarmac in the September sun, looking at the small jet. He said, Mom? She said, Yeah. He said, Is this ours? She said, It belongs to Julian. He thought about this. He said, Does that mean we can use it when we need to? She said, Sometimes. He said, That seems like a good person to know. She laughed. The flight was 40 minutes to a private airstrip near the Wyndham Estate in the Willamette Valley. Diane talked to the entire flight. Cooper asked Warren questions through the cockpit door. Miles read. Julian sat next to Rebecca and did not try to hold her hand until she reached over and took his. They landed. Black SUVs were waiting. They drove through a wine country to the Wyndham estate, rolling hills of vineyard, white tents in the distance strung with lights that would come alive in the evening, everything manicured, everything expensive. The kind of event where the floral arrangements alone cost more than Rebecca's monthly rent had been. The kind of event Garrett always said they couldn't afford when they were married. The SUVs pulled to the front entrance. Doors opened. Julian stepped out first. Then he turned and offered his hand, and Rebecca took it and stepped out and stood in the September afternoon in her emerald dress, with the red nails and the careful hair and her head exactly where it needed to be, which was up. The whispers started before she had taken 3 steps. Is that Rebecca Calloway? Who is that with her? Is that Julian Hartwell? The Julian Hartwell? Did they arrive in a private plane? Rebecca walked forward, one foot, then the other. Julian's hand steady at her back. Diane behind her, already scanning the crowd with the expression of someone ready to enjoy this enormously. The boys flanking her. Cooper curious, Miles watchful. The wedding planner intercepted them, flustered. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't see a +4 on the guest list." Julian spoke quietly. He had the kind of voice that didn't need to be loud to carry. "I'm sure we can work something out," he said. The planner recognized him. Arrangements were made. Across the lawn, through the crowd, Rebecca saw Garrett. He saw her at the same moment. She watched his face do the thing she had predicted. The sequence of reactions. Shock, recalibration, something that might have been fear. Moving across his features in the space of a few seconds, she held his gaze for exactly long enough. Then she looked away first. Not because she was afraid, because she was done performing for him. She had spent 12 years performing. She was done. Patricia Calloway appeared from the left side of the crowd, moving with deliberate purpose. She was dressed quietly, conservatively, in the way of someone who had chosen not to participate in the spectacle. She came to Rebecca. She said, "You look beautiful, Rebecca." Rebecca said, "Thank you, Patricia." Patricia looked at the boys. She said, "Hello, Cooper. Hello, Miles." They said hello with the polite wariness of children who had been told complicated things about adults over time. Patricia looked at Julian. She said, "You must be Julian Hartwell. I've heard a great deal." Julian said, "I hope some of it was good." Patricia said, "Better than Garrett deserves to have said about him." Then she looked at Rebecca one more time. "I'm glad you came," she said. She walked away. Diane leaned in. "Did his mother just—" "Yes," Rebecca said. "The world has—" "I know," Rebecca said. The ceremony took place in the vineyard, rows of white chairs between the vines, late afternoon light going golden the way it did in September in the valley. It was, objectively, beautiful. Rebecca sat with the boys and Julian and Diane in their designated seats. She watched Garrett stand at the altar. He had the posture of a man performing confidence. Shoulders back, jaw set, the practiced ease of someone who believed he was winning. He glanced at Rebecca 3 times before the ceremony began. She looked at the vineyard each time. Tessa came down the aisle in a dress that had probably cost what a small car cost. She was beautiful. She was also, Rebecca noted with something close to sorrow, radiantly happy in the way of someone who did not know what was already in motion. The vows were exchanged. Garrett's voice caught once on the word forever. Rebecca thought about a letter dated 22 months before he filed for divorce. She thought forever meant something different to him. The reception began. Tables, food, A band that played the kind of music chosen to suggest elegance without committing to a specific decade, champagne in tall glasses, servers moving like choreography. Garrett found her during cocktail hour. He waited until Julian was with the boys and Diane had drifted to investigate the appetizer situation. He came to stand beside her at the edge of the lawn. He said, "You brought him here," she said. "You invited me. You wrote, 'The boys should see what a healthy relationship looks like.' I took your advice." His jaw worked. He said, "We need to talk about what you're doing, about the case Jennifer Cross filed." She said, "We can talk through our attorneys." He dropped his voice. Became the other Garrett. The one she had spent years trying to get back to, the softer one. The one who had knelt at a grave and meant it, or seemed to. He said, "I made mistakes. I know that. But some of what we had was real, Rebecca." She looked at him. She said, "I have the letter, Garrett." He went still. She said, "The one you wrote to your attorney, dated 22 months before you filed. The one where you outlined the financial strategy, the LLC formation, the asset transfers, the income structuring, the one that was written before you claimed to have met Tessa." The color left his face in a way that was almost interesting to observe. He said, "Where did you—" She said, "It doesn't matter. What matters is that I spent years wondering what I did wrong, what I wasn't, what I failed to be. And the answer is nothing. I didn't fail anything. You were planning this while I was making dinner, while I was raising your children, while I thought we were fine." She looked at him steadily. She said, "Enjoy your wedding, Garrett." She walked back to Julian. Miles was watching from across the lawn. He nodded once, in the solemn way of a 9-year-old who had understood something important. She nodded back. The reception dinner passed. Speeches were made. Tessa's father, Richard Wyndham, gave a warm, proud speech about his daughter and the future he expected for her. Rebecca watched Garrett receive it with the practiced ease of a man accepting something he knew he did not deserve. Rebecca had told Marcus, "Your timing, your judgment." She had not asked for a signal, had not coordinated timing, had not involved herself beyond handing him the folder and saying, "Richard Wyndham deserves to know what he is investing in." Marcus disappeared with Tessa's father 22 minutes into the reception. They were gone for 22 minutes. Rebecca danced with Miles, who was earnest and slightly out of rhythm. She danced with Cooper, who refused to dance, but stood next to her, swaying, which he would not acknowledge as dancing. She danced with Julian, properly, to a song she did not know the name of, and he was better at it than she expected, which she told him. He said, "I took lessons 3 months ago in case this came up." She stopped moving. She said, "You took dance lessons." He said, "I wanted to be prepared." She looked at him. She started moving again. She said, "Julian." He said, "Yeah." She said, "I love you." She had not said it before, not out loud, not like that. He did not react with any of the things she had feared, not triumph, not relief, not the specific smile of someone who had been waiting for something to be confirmed. He just looked at her. He said, "I love you too. I've loved you for a long time." She said, "I know. I'm sorry it took me." He said, "It took exactly as long as it needed to." Across the dance floor, Richard Wyndham emerged from the side room. His face was stone. She watched him cross to Tessa, touch her arm, show her something on his phone. She watched the color leave Tessa's face in the same way it had left Garrett's earlier, but different. Tessa's was grief where Garrett's had been calculation. Tessa looked across the dance floor at Garrett. He was laughing at something his best man had said. He did not notice his wife watching him. Tessa looked back at her father. She nodded once. Richard Wyndham made a brief, composed announcement. Family matter, the reception would continue. They needed to step away. The Wyndham family, left in a quiet, efficient group that had the organized energy of people who were used to managing crises privately. Garrett watched them go with the expression of a man watching something he cannot stop. He looked at Rebecca. She looked back. She felt nothing dramatic. No triumph, no satisfaction, no particular satisfaction. Just a settled, specific clarity. It is over, she thought. Not the legal pieces, not the paperwork. This, the thing he had held over her, the version of herself she had become, the weight of his opinion of her. That was over. Garrett crossed to her. His composure was largely gone. He said, "What did you do?" She said, "I told the truth. That is all." He said, "You ruined my wedding." She said, "You did that. You have been doing it for years. I just stopped covering it." He looked at Julian. Julian said quietly, "I think she deserves someone who actually sees her value. That has nothing to do with me, specifically. It was always true." Garrett looked at Rebecca. He said, "I made a mistake. With you, I see that now." She looked at him. She said, "I know, and I genuinely hope someday you understand why you made it. Not for my sake, for your son's." She turned to the boys. "Ready?" she said. Cooper said, "More than ready." Miles said, "Can we get in and out on the way back?" She laughed. "A real one." They walked out. She did not look back. 3 months later, Rebecca Calloway bought a house. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a backyard with a mature oak tree that Cooper immediately assessed for climbing suitability. High, he reported, excellent branch structure, and Miles immediately assessed for shade coverage for reading. Also, excellent, he reported. She bought it with her own money. The corrected settlement had come through 6 weeks after the wedding. Jennifer Cross had been, as promised, thorough and relentless. The forensic accounting was undeniable. The letter was undeniable. Marcus's testimony was undeniable. Garrett's attorneys had fought, and then, when the full scope of what they were fighting became clear, had recommended settlement. Rebecca received what she should have received 4 years ago. The house in Lake Oswego had been sold during the divorce. She did not want it back. She bought a different house, in a neighborhood with good schools and a farmer's market on Saturdays, and neighbors who waved. Oh, the boys painted their own rooms. Cooper chose dark blue. Miles chose forest green. They did it on a Saturday, with the radio on and paint on their arms, and it took twice as long as it should have and was the best Saturday Rebecca had had in 4 years. Julian helped. He was bad at painting in the same way he was bad at cooking, committed, enthusiastic, producing results that required correction. Cooper told him his lines were uneven. Julian accepted this feedback with dignity. The non-disparagement claim had been dropped. Garrett's attorneys had quietly withdrawn it 3 weeks after filing, once the scope of the counter-documentation became clear. A judge reviewing a claim of disparagement, brought by a man who had committed financial fraud during divorce proceedings, was not a favorable audience. Garrett stepped down from the company. Marcus ran it. Rebecca heard through channels that it was recovering. She wished it well in the abstract way she wished for things that had nothing to do with her anymore. Tessa called once, 6 weeks after the wedding, on a Wednesday evening while Rebecca was making dinner and Miles was doing homework, and Cooper was constructing something structural out of blocks. Tessa said, "I owe you an apology from 4 years ago." Rebecca said, "You don't need..." Tessa said, "I do. I knew he was married. I thought I was different. I thought it meant something that he chose me. And now I know what it actually meant. He needed something I had, and when I stopped being useful, he would have..." She stopped. Rebecca said, "Yes." Tessa said, "I'm sorry. For what I did to you, for the gossip blog thing, for all of it." Rebecca stood at her kitchen stove. She thought about 4 years of 2 jobs and marked down produce and plastic chairs in principals' offices. She said, "You got out. That matters more than the apology. Tessa was quiet for a moment. She said, I'm going back to school. Art history. I always wanted to, and there was always a reason not to. Rebecca said, You're going to be extraordinary at it. Tessa said, How do you know? Rebecca said, Because people who choose to start over after being told they can't are always extraordinary. It's a selection effect, Tessa laughed. Small, surprised. She said, Thank you, Rebecca. Rebecca said, Take care of yourself, Tessa. She hung up. Miles looked up from his homework. He said, Who was that? She said, Someone who needed to hear something true. He nodded as if this explained everything, which it did, and went back to his homework. Patricia sent a card when Rebecca moved in. Inside, I am proud of you. I should have said that years ago. I hope you can find something to do with a late apology. Whatever you decide, I hope you are happy. Rebecca put the card on the refrigerator with a magnet. Not because she had forgiven everything. Some things were too large to resolve quickly, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. But because forgiveness was not the same as forgetting, and both were valid without requiring each other. Garrett texted in October, asking if the boys could come to his birthday dinner. She said yes. He was their father. That did not change. The boys came home from his birthday dinner with cake in a bag and a story about him learning, apparently badly, to make his own pasta. Cooper found this extremely funny. Miles said he seemed quieter. She hoped quiet meant thinking. She thought it might. On a Tuesday evening in November, Rebecca was making dinner, actual dinner, not marked down produce, not granola bars, in the car. And the boys were doing homework, and Julian was at the kitchen table with his laptop, which he had brought because he had a call at 7, but had come early because he brought good cheese and the boys liked when he helped with the hard math problems. Miles said, without looking up from his notebook, Julian, can you check my work? Julian looked up, looked at Rebecca. She looked back at him over the cutting board. Neither of them said anything. Julian pulled Miles's notebook toward him. He said, Walk me through your process. Miles walked him through his process. Later that night, after the boys were asleep, and Julian was in the kitchen cleaning up with the particular focused effort of someone who had accepted that cleaning was a skill he would never fully master, but was going to attempt anyway, Rebecca stood in the doorway of the boys' room. The glow-in-the-dark stars were on these ceilings, too. Different arrangement. She had learned from the experience, had planned the constellations in advance, had used a diagram. Orion was straight this time. She looked at it for a while. She thought, I keep finding ways to be a little better at the things I couldn't do right the first time. That is not failure. That is how it works. Julian came to stand behind her. He said, You okay? She said, I'm good. I'm actually genuinely good. He said, I know. I can tell the difference now. She said, What does it look like? He said, Like this. You standing still and not bracing for the next thing. She turned around. She said, I used to spend every quiet moment waiting for whatever was going to disrupt it. He said, I know. She said, I'm not doing that right now. He said, I know. She looked at him in the doorway of her son's room in her own house with the oak tree in the backyard and the green walls and the straight Orion. She said, Julian. He said, yeah. She said, thank you for waiting. He said, thank you for being worth waiting for. She said, that is objectively the most embarrassing thing you have ever said. He said, I know, I stand by it. She shook her head, took his hand. They walked back to the kitchen. Outside, November was doing what November did in Oregon. Gray, persistent. The kind of rain that was not dramatic, but was very committed. The oak tree in the backyard was losing its leaves, in the unhurried way of something that knew it would grow them back. Rebecca stood at the kitchen window and looked at it. This is what I want to leave you with. Not the arrival at the wedding, not the moment Tessa's father walked out of that room, not the settlement, not the house, not even the Tuesday evening when a 9-year-old boy asked a man to check his math without thinking twice about it. What I want to leave you with is the parking lot, the 2015 Civic with the 140,000 miles, the 22 minutes sitting in the dark, not starting the car after leaving the principal's office. Not because that was the worst moment, but because that was the real moment. The one where I had to decide, not dramatically, not with an audience, not with anyone watching, whether I was going to keep going. I kept going. That is the whole story. Not the dress, or the plane, or the man with the kind eyes. Not the evidence, or the courtroom, or the settlement. All of those things happened because I kept going. Because on every Thursday, that was terrible, I made a spreadsheet on Friday. Because on every night the panic came, I asked one useful question and waited for morning. Because when everything hit at once, and it did, all at once, the job and the home and the custody motion in the same 72 hours, I did not wait to feel strong before I took the next step. I was never strong. I was just willing, over and over, every day, willing to take one more step. That is available to you. Right now, wherever you are, whatever your version of the wobbly table is, whatever your version of the parking lot is, it is available. You do not need a plan. You need a direction and a willingness to move. That is always enough to begin. You already have it. You have had it the whole time. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.